everyone, and welcome to another monthly reads video. So the past month I've read two books, and these were Prince of the Blood and The King's Buccaneer. They're both a part of the riftwar cycle and they are paired together. Now this isn't because they sort of have a story that flows through, it's because within these two books they have some characters that go through which I don't think we've really seen before, and I'm not sure if we ever really see them much again. Obviously I'll have to wait until I've read some of the other books to know that, but I know for sure one of them we don't see again, so tiny little spoiler there. Both of these books follow brothers. So the first book, Prince of the Blood, follows both Boric and Erland, and they're twins, and when they are sent off to the Empire of Kesh to be an embassy for the kingdom, to sort of get them out of mischief and teach them some sort of like royal duties kind of thing. And that's sort of the plot of that book, and it's set against the backdrop of this sort of plot to try and start a war between the kingdom and Kesh. Then the book, The King's Buccaneer, is about their much younger brother Nicholas, and it's set 10 years after. And it's about how he's quite shy and, you know, he's always a good kid, but they want to sort of toughen him up a bit, ready for sort of like his life as being a member of the royal family. So they decide to send him to Cryde to be out in the middle of nowhere, get a bit of, you know, an idea of sort of like what it's like living out in the sticks and sort of like what a sort of local lord has to do. But this all goes wrong when there's a raid on the castle, and many of the young people, including his cousin, get kidnapped and taken away. Luckily, Nicholas's ship hasn't left the area yet, so they all get back on that boat and they go chasing after these pirates that have taken the people from the town, and it sort of leads into a much bigger plot that sort of links to the overarching story. We see things coming back up that were in earlier books, and like main plot points from Magician. We see Pug in both of these books as well. It's quite interesting. The structure of both of them is very similar, so it's kind of difficult to talk about them separately. They both start in Crondor at court and court life and how these boys are dealing with their position in the world, and then something happens and they get basically told no, they've got to leave, and then they leave, and on that journey they meet Pug in the very early stages of the journey, and then they get to where they're going, and then things don't quite go as to plan once they get where they're going. They're not very long books, considering. I reckon they're probably very similar in length to most of the later riftwar books, which is quite nice. It makes them a short, snappy read. You can definitely tell that these novels have very much of a D&D feel. The previous two books that I read that were part of the riftwar cycle, they didn't really have that sort of like D&D element where you felt like a party was gathered together and then sent on an adventure, and then everything was going to plan, and suddenly something sort of crops up and things don't quite work out as they're supposed to. And I kind of like that element in the riftwar books, how you've got that sort of like building of the story, and then it sort of splits off and then everything comes back together again. I've always really liked that and enjoyed that element of them. The writing is exactly as you'd expect for all the other riftwar books, you know. It's very modern fantasy, it's very fast paced when it needs to be, you know. It's not as emotional as it could be in certain places. I feel like sometimes you're supposed to feel a little bit more for these characters than you do, especially in Prince of the Blood. I think just because they were sort of very sort of much lads in that, sort of like being taught that they can't be lads and they have to become royal princes, sort of, I wasn't exactly as on board with their story as I could have been. I found it interesting though, learning about a new place in the riftwar world that we haven't really been to. Like, in some of the books we've had little sort of excursions into Kesh, but we'd never really been into the rest of the Empire, so it was nice to finally see that. And again in The King's Buccaneer, to suddenly be going off on a ship, going off to the Sunset Isles and further west, and to see what was there, like this expanding of the world, I really enjoyed. And it just really fleshes it out, and you see all these different kinds of people and adding these new characters. And I'm excited to see whether these characters come back or whether they don't come back, because obviously I grew quite attached to the earlier characters in the earlier Riftwar books, and to now see them as old sort of like characters on the sidelines, or some of them are now dead, you know, and to see how the world is working without those characters there, or with those characters taking on new roles that aren't necessarily as important within the stories that are being told. I really enjoyed that. Out of the two of them, I definitely preferred The King's Buccaneer. Just personally as a story, it really gelled with me, and I felt like the cast of characters in it were a lot more interesting and sort of like less alike. Also, I felt in Prince of the Blood there were certain elements of the story which weren't necessarily interesting to me, and I felt like everything wound up very quickly in that book, whereas in The King's Buccaneer I feel like you kind of knew it was going to wind up quickly. They were supposed to get to a place and then rescue the people, and that's kind of what you expected, whereas in Prince of the Blood it was a little bit more convoluted, and so to suddenly have this big plot point happen at the end and then for it to be resolved very quickly made a lot of sense in terms of the plot, but it did feel sort of like very fast-paced and a little bit whiplashy towards the end, which was an issue that I've been finding with some books at the moment. How you've got this really nice, gently paced story and then suddenly bam, something big happens and then everything goes into chaos and then it's fixed. Whereas I feel like in The King's Buccaneer, you had all this really slow, then something big happened and bam, everything changed, and then they had to sort of rework their whole plan for the second half of the book on how they were going to do things, and it meant that when the end, where it was all rush, you kind of sort of saw them making those plans much earlier, and so it felt less of like, oh, okay, that happened very quickly, and oh, they've dealt with this very quickly. Overall, I enjoyed the two books. I thought they were really good, and they were quite solid entries into the Riftwar cycle. You know, they're definitely ones that you have to read because they do talk about some quite important stuff, and although I didn't really see anything that was obviously going to lead to something in Prince of the Blood, I reckon there's probably going to be small things that crop up again, whereas The King's Buccaneer, definitely some very big plot points which I think are going to be key to stuff later on. Like I said, links to some earlier books like Darkness at Sethanon. I really can't say that. There's a lot of words in fantasy books that I can't say. I think that's just the gist of fantasy, really, isn't it? If you've read these books too, let me know in the comments what you thought of them. Did you enjoy them? Were they your favourite Riftwar books or other ones? Obviously, I now have all of the Riftwar books apart from 2, so I am going to be trying to read most of them by the end of the year, hopefully. I need to get that huge bag out of my living room and put actual physical books into storage again, so yeah, storage is an issue. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!